You're welcome to Business Daily on Trust TV. My name is Chamun Dabeng. Let's talk numbers. We're starting off with the market this morning. You're welcome back to the show, and once again, my name is Chamun Dabeng. Today on the show, we're going to be taking a look once again at the strength of the Naira. The International Monetary Fund has advised emerging economies, including Nigeria, to allow their currencies to depreciate in response to tighter funding conditions and an imminent policy tightening by the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. Now, Nigeria did devalue its currency last year by 7.6% and maintained a 11.5% interest rate. All issues being considered, should Nigeria further devalue its currency, making it the third devaluation in a short period of time, or turn a deaf ear to the IMF? Joining me in the studio today is financial analyst and economist Steve Nwachukwu. Now, Mr. Steve, what are your thoughts on the advice that the International Monetary Fund is throwing out to emerging economies? And of course, Nigeria is a part of those developing economies.
Thanks once again for having me. First, I think on the heels of the advice or alarm raised by IMF, but I think what Nigerians are looking at is the aspect of the devaluation of Naira. Actually, me, from my own point of view, I'm taking from the fact that IMF actually raised an alarm on our debt profile, because they are talking about those vulnerability factors.
Yes.
We are actually in that threshold of those vulnerability factors. How do you checkmate them? How do you control this vulnerability? Because our exposure to foreign debt and our exposure to even domestic debt is so alarming. I think that's from the point I'm looking at, from where IMF have to warn you. If you have to sustain this current rate of economic realities, you have to devalue Naira, or you have to raise your interest rate, MPR, to something 13 or 14% or 15%. So I am actually looking at it from that perspective, that they have looked at these parameters, they have looked at the facts before us. The realities before us, that's why they actually advised the Nigerian government to devalue Naira. No more of the anti-IMF looking at from that, why should we devalue Naira or not? Actually, is a warning to Nigerian government to a kind of place a moratorium or a ban on borrowing. Because everything is anchored on the size of our borrowed funds, the size of our revenue to GDP and revenue to our income against our debt profile. So these are the facts available with IMF, and also facts available with us within the system. That's why we've been calling on government to please stop borrowing. Stop borrowing. The more you borrow, you are pushing out to those vulnerability limb lines, or those vulnerability factors that are available that will cause us to be in a precarious situation that we're actually in. Why IMF is advising you, please take away subsidy so that you can have more fun. Please take away electricity subsidy also so that you can have more fund to government, and also devalue Naira. It's because you have actually overborrowed. You have borrowed to an extent that is affecting the economic parameters, or the economic, macroeconomic parameters that will keep the economy going.
All right, so now taking a look at our debt profile, this is something I've had a discussion on before. We are actually not not as indebted as many other nations. For for example, the countries like the UK, countries like the US itself, China, and the rest of them, their own debt profile basically runs into the trillions, whilst ours is a lot less than theirs. Why is it so different for a country like Nigeria that there is a red alarm that's going off?
Okay, I think for the purpose of our listeners or our viewers, I think we have to put this thing white and black, in the sense that you're talking about the size of borrowed fund of the US, of size of borrowed fund in Japan, of size of borrowed fund in China compared to Nigeria. That's not what we are looking at. We are looking at your size of borrowed fund, your debt to your GDP. The ratio. Yes, our ratio is somewhere within 40%, although government is claiming it's less than 35%, but it's close to 40%. That's why the government is hoping on taking it to 60-65%. Now, what is the size of Nigerian GDP? It compared Nigeria among the rest of the world. The GDP of Nigeria is among, I think, around 100 or thereabout. We don't have any much in investment. In Africa, yes, we are the first. But you cannot be borrowing consistently. Take, for instance, the 2022 budget. You have a deficit of 7 trillion, close to 7 trillion. You are expected to hit the or debt market again to borrow. So it's not a question of how much is US borrowed, or how much have China borrowed, or how much have Japan borrowed compared to Nigeria. No, that comparison should do with on your gross domestic product, the size of our economy, the size of revenues you generate. Nigeria currently is generating, whatever Nigeria is generating is using 100% of such fund to service the debt. That's why we're saying debt to revenue to debt service is about 100%. Facts that are statistics available, although not verified, that Nigeria is actually borrowing to service its debts, which is very bad if you are borrowing to service your existing debts. So I think it's even with the hicks of that, the IMF is asking Nigeria, please do this and do that. Do one, they should devalue Naira. Two, they should think of raising interest rate. They should do something about subsidy removal, and they also do something about electricity subsidy, because currently we are subsidizing electricity. So these are the areas they have looked at. So the question, and I keep saying it, the point is that we have borrowed to this point, to this red line, that all these advices should be coming from these very organizations across the world. If actually we are borrowed within our mix, how can you be borrowing and your revenue to debt service is about 100%, as at last year is around 90-something percent, and we have not added about $5.4 billion they borrowed last year to it. Have in mind that most of the loans they took in 2008, I mean this government, when I say they took loan, federal government took loan in 2009, in 2019, and in 2020 and 21. Most of them has a moratorium of 2 years, some 1 year, meaning they are not paying anything yet. 2022 and 2023 will be the hip of our debt service, and it's going to shoot over 100 to 130%. And why can you be running a government in that manner? That's why, for me, to checkmate most of these vulnerability lines that we have crossed, we have to actually improve in our spending efficiency. This is the only way to tackle it. Improve in our spending efficiency. Stop most of these elephant projects. Stop most of these projects you can find in the budget that are frivolous. They don't have impact to the Nigerian economy. Find a way to cut or even stop all these loopholes where you see some of these politicians and civil servants siphoning Nigerian funds. These are the area you can improve. If you improve in this spending efficiency, it will cut off these wastages you are having. You are having a budget of 17 trillion. Some people can say that even 40 to 60% of that budget will enter into the private purse. This is what we are talking about. Improve in your spending efficiency. That because most of all those line items in the budget are frivolous. They don't have direct impact in Nigeria. You had the Mr. President raising alarm that National Assembly have inserted projects worth over 6,000 projects that doesn't have a direct impact. These are the inefficiencies in the spending capacity of Nigeria. If you improve in those areas, you have excess funds to fund your government. And Organizations like IMF will not be advising you to devalue Naira. They're actually advising you to devalue your currency because you have crossed the red line in borrowing. That's why I keep warning that government of Nigeria should ban itself. Government of Nigeria, fact President Muhammadu Buhari should ban himself from borrowing further with.
All right.
Place a moratorium on borrowing. If for 2 years, if for 1 year, so that you don't borrow again. So because of this red line you have crossed, you have excessively borrowed.
All right. So looking at the recent financial act that was just put out there, we did talk about it, and we talked about that one particular area where, they talked about borrowing for, certain infrastructures, and there wasn't really a clear definition as to why they were doing that. Now that you actually have that in place, do you really see a situation where Nigeria can escape that situation of having to devalue the Naira?
Well, it's an optional thing. It's an advice. It's a mere advice that International Monetary Organization or other multinational organization can advise you, because they borrow to you. The prerequisites or the conditions for them to borrow, most of them are these very indices, because they cannot give you money while they cannot tie those money to a certain project or find a return of same money, a kind of proceeds, a kind of profit you are making from such product. It could be human capital, it could be abstract physical cash that you gain from such projects. So they are not finding those items. That's why they are advising you, do this so that you can raise more money. Do this so that you can raise more money. When you remove fuel subsidy, you have unlocked over 1.2 or 1.4, 1.5 trillion naira for your spending. If you remove electricity tariffs, you are closely up to 1 trillion too. Then if you devalue Naira, depending the size of the areas you are targeting or the rate you are, the devaluation you are going to take, you actually will release so much money. So that's why they're actually advising the federal government. The only way to escape it, I keep saying it, is the best practice. Open governance. Open governance, which it requires transparency in execution of your project and actually implementing this very aspect of faith, which is improve in your funding efficiency. I said it again, take away these elephant projects, take away these very projects that doesn't have a direct impact on Nigeria. Stimulate your economy and create that growth that will require taxes to be paid to the government, and you have sufficient funds. Don't go again in the debt market. I keep saying it. 2022 budget is overtly ambitious budget. A budget of 17 trillion, a projected revenue of 10.7 trillion, and you have never realized even 8 or 9 trillion ever in this lifeline of this administration, and you are projecting 10 trillion. Yes, you have some other taxes or some other forms of revenues that will be coming to government because you're trying to open the tax net to tax Nigerians more. But the point is that when you overtax the system, it stifles production. It causes some businesses to go down. Because when you take, for instance, when you take away subsidy, it's going to affect the business community, and it's going to affect smaller, medium and small businesses. They will close down. And those smaller taxes they raise to increase your tax revenue will be dropping. So that's why we continue to advise the best way out is to improve in your funding or spending efficiency.
All right, so now taking a look at the current situation of the country, we're facing inflation since the last devaluation anyway. Would you really say that things have actually gotten, a little better? Have you noticed any difference so far regarding the stability of the Naira or even the stability of the economy?
I think it's still centered around that efficiency in your funding, because you can devalue Naira and the same money you raise from devalue Naira or raise from removal of subsidy or raise from removal of electricity subsidy, you still find those funds in the pocket hands. That's why I keep saying it centers around the issue of improve in funding efficiency. These frivolosities will funds in the budget, those projects that they double it, some projects are found in 3 places in the budget. These are the things that are taking these funds away. No matter what you do, yes, it's a question of how much have you done with the past 3, 4, 5 consecutive devaluation of Naira. You have raised trillion. What is the evidence? Even the trillions the government have borrowed, what are the evidence? You continue to call on this government. Please show us to, in fact, it's a point of accountability. That's why I say there should be a ban on borrowing. Federal government should ban itself from borrowing further. That's the truth.
How possible is that in the Nigerian reality? I mean, we're a country that has been practically riddled by corruption. Part of our major problems is actually corruption, where we have certain politicians or, certain bodies or whatever it is putting aside money and, like you said, inflating, or should I say padding the budget itself. It's been a continuous situation. I mean, at the beginning of President Buhari's regime, he basically went after politicians he felt were corrupt. But how much of a difference has that actually made? Even the monies that were realized during that period, how much have we actually seen make a difference in our society?
Yeah, I think the question is how sincerity is in the fight of corruption. How far have they gone? What's the realities of, if we want to take a checkmate of corruption index or corruption fighting performance index or whatever, you can't find any to favor this government, in the sense that these are the same cry that we had prior before this government took over. Everywhere is corrupt, the people are taking money, and the same thing is happening. In fact, in the lifeline of the past administration, we've never had a huge budget of this nature. In the last, I've checked, when Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was the Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of Economy, we never had a budget close to 6 trillion. In the lifeline of from 1999 in this very fourth republic, from 1999 to 2015, we never had a single budget size of 6 trillion. But this government came in, had a budget of 6 trillion, 8 trillion, 9 trillion. Now we are having 17 trillion. Telling you there is a lot of money within the system. A lot of money available for government to spend by borrowing or by the revenue they've generated. So what are the realities? And we're still talking about corruption. We're still talking about people siphoning billions and trillions of naira. So this is a question to the integrity text of this corruption perception or posture of this government, that they are fighting corruption. For me, I have not seen any reality of fighting corruption, because you cannot have such kind of size of budget and the realities cannot be fed on the Nigerian people. Now, come to talk about the issue of recurrent expenditure. This is where I say that this government is more endemic in corruption than any other government. In 2019 till 2015, we had a recurrent expenditure close to 60, 70, 75%, 50 to 75, a range of 60 to 75%. Those governments had less than 5 trillion size of budget, and they are having 75 or 70 or 60% of what you have from between that 1999 till 2015. Now, the size of their project or size of their budget have never exceeded 5.5 trillion. This government came and their size of their budget is over 5, 7, 8, 10, down to 17 trillion. The recurrent expenditure is still taking the same position of 65% to 70%. This is why I said the corruption is endemic, in the sense that if you had such a chunk of budget of 17 trillion, your recurrent expenditure should have dropped down to like 40% or 45% against capital expenditure, in the sense that the size of civil servant we have not doubled itself. From, let's assume, even from the time they took over in 2015, they have not doubled. The size of civil servants have not doubled. In fact, if you go to some ministries, there is even an embargo on employment and the rest of them. So why is the recurrent expenditure still taking the chunk of over 60 to 65% of our budget?
But is it really an issue of the current government, or is it as a result of systems that have, or a system that has been continuously failing?
Well, I think I cannot be blaming the past government for their mistake. I should be looking at the present government. Whatever past government have done, I'm actually comparing it with what this present government, who has this anti-corruption, this posture of fighting corruption. You should have by now, the recurrent ghost workers and the rest you may call it, should have dropped to a percentage of 40 to 35%, because you're having a size of budget of 17 trillion. Why should recurrent also take up to 60%? That's the question. Recurrent is servicing the capital. Have in mind, the essence of recurrent is to carry out the aspect of the capital component of your budget. Recurrent is civil servant, how you are doing your carrying out those activities, inspections, visiting the site, and that's the recurrent. That's simply what recurring takes. Using what you have, the human capital resources you have, to service the capital that you want to build a road project. The minister and the head of departments or the PAMSEC down to whosoever will supervise those projects. That's a recurrent. To service them, pay their staff salary or do the monitoring, and that's the recurrent.
All right.
Making laws by the National Assembly, that's the recurrent. Now, why would your recurrent expenditure still sharing such volume of percentage, over 60%, against a budget of 5 or 6 trillion being carried out by the past administration? You are having a budget of 17 trillion. You are still having such kind of percentage. There is a corruption. There is something in there, because I have not seen the size of ministry doubled. We don't have double Ministry of Education, or having double Ministry of Agriculture, or having double Ministry of Works. It's still the same single Ministry of Works, single Ministry of the same number of staffs. If there is an increase, it's not up to 10 to 15, 20%. What would you still be having a recurrent expenditure of such magnitude?
All right, so before we go, we only have a few minutes left before we have to round up. Now, there were certain hints of another devaluation that was actually being thrown out there in the news. Now, I asked you earlier, do you actually foresee Nigeria escaping the situation where we have to further devalue? Remember, we've already devalued down to 7.6%. And, you know, is it possible for us to actually see a third devaluation if things continue to be this way? Would we have to, you know, finally increase these interest rates in order for us to keep running as a nation?
Well, I think the side of the interest rate is optional too. Even the value naira may not that be optional, in the sense that the trend at which this government is going, Central Bank of Nigeria, from the monetary policy aspect, is actually defending naira. Is actually doing all its best to defend naira. But from the point of fiscal policy, we are not seeing those policies that will support the monetary policy of the federal government. Now, the value naira is rather an optional, in the sense that the pressure on naira, we find that since last 2 or 3 weeks now, the foreign reserve has been dropping from over 41 or thereabouts.
It's about 30-something
39 or 38 billion dollars now as we speak. So this is the pressure. This is what the IMFs are looking at, and looking also at your size of your debt to GDP, your debt revenue to debt service. These are the ratios they are looking. The pressure is mounting. Have in mind that I told you that this government borrowed in 2019, borrowed in 2020, and most of those borrowed funds has moratorium of 2 years, a year and 6 months, and 1 year, meaning they will not be servicing those loans. They did not service it in 2020 or 2019 or 2021. Rather, in 2022 and 2023 and further, those loans will be due for servicing, and which means that it's going to increase your debt service ratio in your budget. It's going to force you again to pay more debts, service those debts, meaning that your revenue to debt service will rather cross the 100 mark, meaning you will be required further to borrow to service your debt, and that will be a very dangerous. So it's inevitable. The pressure is there. If you look at the current exchange rate, the official rate is at 414 or 413.
It's been moving around that area.
And the unofficial, which is the most available market, that is the parallel market, the unofficial market, is about 570 or 565, depending who you meet. So look at the gap. The gap is quite big, and that pressure is here. And we are a consuming nation. We are a consuming nation. Those items that will continue to consume on a daily basis is still there. The demand and pressure will continue. So it's inevitable. It's inevitable to see Central Bank waking up tomorrow to say that we have moved from 414 or 415 currently position. Well, let's take what is there in the budget, which is 410, to about maybe 450. So it's inevitable to see this government or to see this administration devalue naira because of the debt profile, the size of the public debt this government have acquired over time. So they should ban themselves from borrowing again. They should place a moratorium of government from borrowing funds anymore, so that we can salvage this nation, because the economy is actually getting down.
All right, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, but yes, for a country like Nigeria that's highly dependent on importation, devaluation of the naira is really not an option. As it is, many businesses are currently struggling, many homes are currently struggling, so this really can't. Like my guest in the studio said, there needs to be a ban on borrowing, some sort of restriction, and the government does need to become more prudent when it comes to its spending. All right, so we've come to the end of our show for today, and I would like to thank my guest in the studio. Thank you so much, Mr. Steve, for being a part of the show, and to our viewers out there, thank you so much for watching, pardon me. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Just look us up at Trust TV
and Twitter.
News. Just look us up at Trust TV News and you'll definitely find us there. Well, once again, my name is Chamun Dabeng. Come back again for more Business Daily. Let's talk numbers.